Salam, everyone, and welcome to our Know Your Rights webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing international travel, border screening, and what to expect at the airport. My name is Shauna Nissan. I'm a staff attorney at cair-chicago, and I will be co-moderating this discussion along with my colleague, Noah Halpern, who is also a staff attorney here at CAIR. I'm so glad that you're all here. We know that this is, an incredibly timely and important issue for many in our communities, especially in light of recent targeting and scrutiny of Muslim, Arab, Palestinian, and South Asian travelers. And we hope this space helps equip you with information and tools to protect yourself and others when deciding, whether you should travel. We're joined today by some wonderful panelists, but first, I'd like to invite our Executive Director, Ahmed Rahab, to offer a few opening remarks. Ahmed?
Thank you very much, Shauna. I don't know if you guys can see me on the screen yet.
We can.
Yes? Okay. It is a privilege to be able to host this very important webinar, which is really timely given the calls we have received, the cases we have open, the clients that are coming to us from across the breadth of the community in regards to travel, issues that they face. And this isn't just limited to individuals who are on immigrant visas or even green card holders, but even US citizens as well. And various scenarios are at play in each of those categories that we'll go through. But we're seeing things like US citizens being delayed in secondary for up to 9 hours because of a social media post of a starving child with Arabic text, and they're looking for a translator because they think it's Hamas propaganda. Atrocious scenarios like that. So it's really important for everybody in our community to be educated as to what we are seeing, what the stakes are, what they can do, what you can do to protect yourself and to put yourself in the best position as you travel. This isn't a fear-mongering thing. Everybody should remain confident in the fact that if we've done nothing wrong, we have nothing to apologize for. But if others are involved in nefarious means of gnawing at our rights and our privileges as American citizens, we have to be able to educate ourselves, to protect ourselves. So that's what this session is about. We have with us a very dear friend and ally of the community in Kalman Resnick, whom many of you know, a Jewish American attorney who's been involved in CAIR's work for so long and is now formally on our new cair-chicago Legal Advisory Board, along with many other luminaries. And he's a partner at a major law firm, and he'll be introduced by Sean in a second. And also, of course, we have Hina, who is a co-founder of our Civil Rights Department, back with us. We're very happy to have her. Hina Musabji, as well as Noah Halpern and Shauna, whom you've heard from, Shauna Nissan, our staff attorneys. Lastly, before I switch it back to Shauna to get this going, I want to remind you guys that we have our annual banquet coming up October 5th, 2025. That's a Sunday in Drury Lane at 5 p.m. And it's going to be a great event, very timely event, and I hope you guys stay tuned. You can go to cair-chicago.org/2025 to register and keep up to date with updates on that event. With that, I wish you a very informative session. I turn it back to Shauna.
Thank you, Ahmed. So I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists and go over a little bit of housekeeping. So as Ahmed mentioned, we have Hina Musabji, who is the legal director here at cair-chicago, and she leads our immigration and civil rights advocacy. And we're also lucky to have Kalman Resnick, who's a partner at HSPRD. He's a veteran immigration attorney and a valued member of CAIR's Legal Advisory Board. Before we get into the discussion, though, just a couple notes. So we have a Q&A function where you can submit your questions, and we'll have Noah monitoring that throughout the session. I only ask that you avoid sharing details about your individual immigration situation or your case. We're only here to give general legal information. This is not legal advice. If you need specific legal advice, please reach out to an immigration attorney directly. Okay, Hina and Kalman, can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing on the ground? Hina, I'll start with you. What kinds of patterns or concerns have been coming up in our work at cair-chicago?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main point of this webinar is really to take a look at different issues prior to traveling internationally, and take a close look at to see if you're putting yourself at any risk. And what we're currently seeing, and it's probably because we're a Muslim civil rights organization, is that Muslims are bearing the brunt of what's happening at the airport, right? CBP is subjecting Muslims to increased scrutiny. I mean, it's not just limited, to non-immigrant visa holders. We're seeing that with U.S. citizens and green card holders. Um, and a focus of the percentage of people we've gotten coming telling us about this happened to be Muslim males, young Muslim males who are subjected to extra screening. Even more so if there's any sort of Palestinian ties or pro-Palestinian advocacy. And if you have like a criminal history, even if it's not a conviction, even if it's something as simple as being charged with something, we're seeing those kind of people targeted a little bit more than others. But the whole point of today's webinar is to walk you through everything, to walk you through the different processes, and come up with, protections and understanding what your rights are and what to expect, and maybe when not to travel as well. But Kalman, I would love to hear more about what you're seeing in practice and in the work you do.
Well, I'm a non-Muslim, and I can tell you Muslims are being subject to particularly greater scrutiny than others. And that doesn't mean others are not in danger too, but if you're Muslim, you're much more likely to have a problem if you're returning from international travel. And what I want to emphasize here is whatever has happened in the past when you've traveled internationally is not necessarily going to happen this time. So if someone has been out of the country as a permanent resident for more than 6 months in the past and never had a problem returning, that doesn't mean this time you won't have a problem. And so before someone leaves the country who has been and may be out for more than 6 months, you better apply for a reentry permit, which should insulate you from problems upon returning if you're out of the country for more than 6 months and you're a permanent resident. The fact that in the past you haven't been asked about arrests that show up on when they check your fingerprints doesn't mean this time you're not going to be detained at the airport. And while the criminal records are checked to determine if you are subject to being in removal proceedings. So whatever has happened in the past, things are much worse now. This is worse than the first Trump 1 administration. Trump 2 is much more dangerous for all Americans, but for Muslim Americans, it's a particularly challenging time.
Thanks for that. So what I'm getting is that this new administration seems to be disproportionately young Muslim men, particularly those with Palestinian heritage or visible signs of Muslim identity, and that whatever's happened in the past is no indication of how your experience at the airport might happen or what might happen moving forward. So let's move into what actually happens at the airport. Can you guys walk us through what happens during primary and secondary inspection?
Yeah.
Well, I think even before we get to that point, I think it's important to understand that when a plane takes off for the United States from almost every place in the world except those ports, those airports that have U.S. Customs and Border Protection's officials at the airport, like in Canada and several other countries in Ireland and the UAE. What happens is the airline sends the manifest, the list of passengers with information about their identity and immigration statuses as presented to the airline. That goes, the manifest is sent to the CBP office, a CBP office, where it's reviewed before the plane arrives in the United States. And that review of the manifest is used to determine which passengers are going to be subject to extra scrutiny. So even before a plane arrives in the U.S., the passengers have been reviewed by CBP, U.S. Customs or Border Protection, in terms of whatever information the government can find on them, and a determination is made as to whether people should be sent to secondary inspection after primary inspection. And that's important to understand, that the government has time while planes in uh, in transit to get information, to check files, to check records, and determine who they want to speak with in an
That's
extra.
why sometimes you'll find right when you disembark from the plane, before you've even gone to initial or secondary, there'll be somebody waiting for you as you disembark.
So that it's really important to understand that it's hard, in the current environment where so much information is available to the government in their own records and in other records, to think you're going to not have a problem, or they're not going to notice something when they have so many records available to them to determine whether or not you are admissible to the United States, or if there's a reason to challenge your permanent residency, or is a reason to check your social media, or a reason to check your um, FBI record. All these things are being checked, and that's why it's super important that you see CAIR or a lawyer with expertise in this area to determine before you leave the country what you need to do to protect yourself, and to determine whether it's how dangerous, how unsafe is it for you to travel internationally.
Thank you for that. So before we get into the discussion, to help us get a sense of the room, we're going to launch a quick poll. Hafsa, if you could.
Yeah, so you'll see a poll on there, if our attendees could answer. When entering the US from international travel, and then it'll give you a few choices. Just so we know what people on the webinar here now are experiencing. Maybe we'll give people another 15 seconds, and then we can have, so once you have enough people responding, we can kind of launch or get the results.
Waiting for just about 75% feedback. We're almost there. Thanks everyone for their participation.
I mean, we can continue talking while we're waiting for that.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if we can talk about what are some of the common reasons that people are being referred to secondary screening?
I think, Kelman, you hit on a lot of them, right? Whether it be criminal records, looking at your immigration history.
Okay, so let me go through a couple that I think are recent, new ones. If you have recently traveled to Syria, that is on the trip that you currently are on, the government seems to be sending those people, US citizens, permanent residents, and non-immigrants, to secondary. Now, I can't say that every person who's traveled to Syria has been had that come up, but I've had many calls from people, and I know CAIR's had some who recently had to go to secondary after travel to Syria. That occurs frequently for people flying in from Istanbul on the Turkish airline flights, but I've had it happen to other people traveling from other cities besides Istanbul. That you should assume, and if you have elderly parents who are living primarily in Syria, but are permanent residents, and they've been out for more than 6 months, that's a real concern. They may be pressured in secondary to relinquish their permanent residency. And so it's really important in those situations to consider applying for a reentry permit before departing. You can't apply for a reentry permit while you're outside the country. So you have to do it while you're in the country. And that's advisable for most people who are permanent residents and may be out of the country for more than 6 months. In the case of people who are elderly, it's really important because someone may get sick and have to stay out of the country for more than 6 months. Even if someone's been out for more than 6 months, they may be admitted just without a reentry permit, but it makes it much easier if you have a reentry permit.
So we've had some questions come in that I think are worth bringing up before we get too far away from them. So our first question that came in was, does it feel as if there are certain nationalities, particularly Iranian in this case, that feel particularly targeted or that should be extra concerned?
I think it's absolutely true that Iranians, Palestinians, Syrians, Yemenites are probably at the top of the list of people who are going to be subject to extra scrutiny.
We're getting a lot of reports of those of Pakistani nationality too. We're getting stopped. So any Muslim majority country, for the most part, seems to be on that target list.
And the next question is, Kalman, you mentioned that CBP has sort of a manifest, right? A passenger list sent to them, and they can start the review process. What do they see specifically? Is there an awareness of whether there are pending immigration applications, I-140s, a DV lottery, anything like that?
They have access to all that information, and they also have access to all visa applications that have been filed. Give you an example. Someone immigrated to the United States based on marriage to a U.S. citizen. They have that information available to them, what was said at that time. And if someone is returning to the country and they or traveling, because information they have on the manifest is that who you are traveling with. So let's say the man immigrated through marriage to a U.S. citizen and is now traveling with someone else who appears to be his wife, but it's not the person that through whom he obtained his permanent residence. Even if the person is now a U.S. citizen, who is this wife? What happened to wife number one? And was there fraud in the process of obtaining permanent residence? They have all that information available so that that man could be sent to secondary inspection and interrogated about, was that a real marriage you had, the first marriage? Those are the types of problems that they have. They have information. They may not have criminal records as to what happened once you were charged. They may only have the information about the charge, but they don't know the disposition. And so that's another area where they will identify that the person had a criminal charge, and they will confirm that when the person gets off the plane by the checking of fingerprints and photographs, and then they can send the person to secondary and interrogate them about what happened, or say, we're going to hold you at the airport if you're a permanent resident, for example, until you have a family member bring your disposition of the criminal charges. And then they may then hold you and while you're put in removal proceedings. Now, people are being detained overnight at O'Hara. There's no real detention facility, so they put people in these small rooms and have them sleep on the floor and are given minimal food. So that's a good reason why if someone has an arrest, they really need to see a lawyer with talent in this area of law to review any criminal charges and the dispositions to determine whether the person is admissible to the country despite that arrest record and disposition. Really important to do that before you travel, not have this develop into a problem while you're in detention at the airport.
Cameron, do you recommend that they have those disposition documents on them, or have a trusted person back home, like, arriving here in the U.S. To hang on to those and bring if we need it?
Assuming that the disposition documents don't make the person deportable or inadmissible. It's good usually to have those records, but unfortunately the law is somewhat ambiguous about which convictions could lead to your being inadmissible or removable, and that's why it's really good to have a lawyer review those documents and then have a letter from the lawyer explaining why, if the records show that the person is not inadmissible or removable. And that's super important. And one thing that's in Illinois particularly is really important to understand is many times when people get charged with crimes, minor crimes, like misdemeanors, like shoplifting, the lawyer who represents them or the public defender says, just plead guilty and you'll get supervision, and after a year, the conviction's gone. But unfortunately, although that would not be a conviction for the purposes of Illinois law, once the supervision period is successfully completed, it is a conviction for immigration law, for federal law. And so just because some lawyer who represented you told you that wouldn't be a conviction after a year doesn't mean it isn't a conviction that could make you inadmissible.
Yeah, so if you're in criminal proceedings, it's really important. And if you're, not a citizen, to make sure you do speak to an immigration attorney along with your criminal proceedings.
And let me tell you that if criminal defense lawyer knows your immigration status, either that lawyer should be able to advise you because the lawyer knows immigration law, or the lawyer should send you to recommend that you get to an immigration lawyer so that you know the consequences of any plea of guilty. Because particularly in this area of the country, in our wonderful sanctuary state, many of the state's attorneys will be helpful in trying to get an arrangement that does not make someone deportable. Because we are a state where we support our immigrant communities, if the state's attorneys understand what the situation is, they may be willing to work out an arrangement with regard to the charges that does not make someone deportable. Not always, but frequently.
Mm-hmm. And I'd just like to add that, even an expungement doesn't cure the immigration defect. You can have a conviction expunged and it can still be considered in deciding whether you're admissible, whether you're deportable.
And let me say one other thing.
Charges. Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
The burden at the airport is on you to show that you are admissible. So that's why they can hold you until as long as they do in secondary while they're deciding whether or not you're admissible, and they can put the burden on you to present these records. Now, sometimes the records, you don't want to present them with the records because they may not be willing to spend the time to get the records. It used to be that at the airport, they would release people in what's called deferred inspection. You would be able to go home, and then 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later, you show up for a deferred inspection where they review and they ask you to bring the records there. They don't, in most cases now, they just hold you. They don't let you leave for deferred inspection. So this is really important to consider. And the time that's best to consider all these issues is before you travel internationally, not after you've left the country and are now dealing with whether or not this is going to be a problem. And then you have a much harder time getting information. Really important to understand, U.S. Customs and Border Protection's interpretation of the law is you have no right to a lawyer at the time you're at the airport. So it's not like you could just get on the phone and call a lawyer. You may be allowed to call your family. Your family can call a lawyer, but the lawyer could go out to the airport and never to see you and won't be allowed to see you. This is the time to get good information is before you travel internationally.
Yep. Okay, so let's take a look at the poll. So when entering the United States from international travel, it looks like historically 70% of you have not had any trouble entering after general inspection. 30% of you have been put into secondary screening. We've got 2% of you have had officials greet you as you disembark from the plane. 6% have been detained for a prolonged period, and about 15% have been too nervous to travel, and so you haven't attempted it yet. So I understand you don't have a right to an attorney at the airport. Can you tell me a little bit about what rights you would have in secondary screening, particularly if you're not a U.S. citizen?
Sure. So, at the basic, I feel like this is almost like I should have the caveat for everything I'll say, but you have the right to remain silent with limits, right? You have to answer questions about your basic identity, and immigration questions, citizenship, visa type, things like that. You don't have to answer questions about your political views, religious beliefs, social, you're going to get, this is such a hard question to answer, but yes, you have that, you have that right to do so. The lawyer piece, Calvin mentioned that they're not allowed to require it, and they normally don't. So there's no guaranteed right to counsel until you're formally charged and detained beyond that inspection period right there. And then you have protections against discrimination. They're not supposed to select you for secondary screening on the basis of your race, religion, national origin, gender, or political beliefs, but we know from our work that they do. And you do have a right to file a complaint, either with DHS TRIP or with the Office of Professional Responsibility. But we found that both of those options haven't been super effective. You can refuse if you are, unlocking devices. We'll get into devices a little bit later, I think, in this discussion. I don't want to get into that now. Others that you can think of, Calvin? I just feel like your rights are
Well, it's different what your status is. So if you're a U.S.
Yeah.
citizen, unless they are questioning whether you're the person in that U.S. passport, you're going to get allowed to enter the country where you're a citizen. But they will make it seem like you're not going to be able to enter if you don't cooperate with them, if you don't give them passwords on your phone or your laptop. They're going to make it seem that they have more rights to interrogate you and make you answer questions than they actually have. So that's U.S. citizens are ultimately they're going to, unless they're going to charge someone with a crime or they are going to let the person enter the country. They may hold you. I've had clients recently held up to 10 hours who are U.S. citizens and Muslim, but that is unusual, but it happens. For permanent residents, again, the questions become, do they have information that they believe makes you inadmissible as a permanent resident or deportable as a permanent resident? And then they may take your you may have information that could help demonstrate that you are admissible, but you're also at risk of giving them information that convinces them that you are inadmissible. And then if you're a non-immigrant coming to study, for example, in F1 student status or J1 exchange visitor status, or coming in as an H1B, you're in a much more delicate situation where non-cooperation may get you denied admission, or even if you cooperate, you may be denied admission. Again, the questions that are here, for example, if someone's coming as an H1B non-immigrant coming to work in the United States, they may question whether the job that you're taking was properly approved for H-1B status. They may question whether you had the education you said you had. They may try to prove that you weren't eligible for H-1B status and then cancel your visa. So people who are non-immigrants are in the most challenging position to not answer questions because it's pretty easy to deny a non-immigrant admission to the United States.
Mhm. And how can I tell the difference between detention and inspection? Like where is the line? How do you know if you're being inspected or being detained?
Well, it's pretty clear when you're in secondary inspection that at a certain point, you're going to be not admitted to the country. But at that point, I would say you know that you're being detained. If you're a U.S. citizen and you know, I'm not sure that the distinction makes much of a difference. You're not free to enter the country until they let you enter the country. So that for that purpose, I'm not sure the distinction is really significant. You're not free. You aren't admitted to the country. And until they allow you to enter, you're not here. You're still on the other side of the line at the airport. Let me talk a little bit about, I've had Muslims traveling through Canada who have traveled to other countries, flown to Canada, and gone through inspection at the airports. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection at almost all airports in Canada have inspection sites there. And I've even had people going through inspection in Canada, and then when they arrive at O'Hare, at the domestic airport, which is where the flights from Canada tend to, the domestic part of the airport, they are then detained and brought to the international side of the airport to be interrogated. So, people who have, if people in the past have had 4 S's on their boarding passes, simply traveling through Canada and successfully entering through Canada doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to have a problem. And everyone who has been getting 4 S's, indicating that they have to go through special security screening before they're allowed to board a flight, is at risk of having problems upon returning to the country. So it's super important that those people talk to lawyers with immigration skills before deciding to travel.
Okay, and it looks like we have a handful of questions about phones and electronic devices, so let's get into that. First, can CBP legally search your phone even though they don't have a warrant?
Unfortunately, yes, they're going to do that. And the best way they can search your phone, they can search your laptop. And so the best way to protect yourself is not to have data on your phones and on your laptops that may subject you to further interrogation. So it's super important to think these things through. My law firm no longer allows us to travel with our cell phones or our laptops without having data and apps deleted that might subject the government giving information about our clients. So when I recently traveled out of the country, when I returned, but I had no email, I had no social media, I had nothing that would reveal any information that the government might be interested in about our clients, and we wanted to protect our clients. So I travel with a special laptop, and then before I get on the plane, the apps are all deleted, emails deleted, social media is deleted, and that is. And I have a special phone for that. My phone we delete everything on there that would reveal information about our clients. So I think everyone needs to get good advice about that, whether your employer has a policy like that or could help you with that. I'm not an expert on an IT expert, but I know there are ways to minimize the ability of the government to get information through searches of cell phones and laptops.
Yeah.
It's also the technology is not foolproof. I understand there's some ways that the government can find deleted information, and there's some technology that may make it possible for them to find things. But as much as possible, I think you should consider how you can protect yourself and um, and when you're traveling internationally by having less information available on phones and laptops.
Yeah, I
So
think it's good to only travel with essential devices. And even if you reviewed your contact and deleted it, there's something called the cloud, which can still be accessed from your phone, which we're seeing, CBP able to access and then use against you. So, um, you know, finding that technology, Calvin, I keep telling you, I would love to find out more about the technology your firm uses, because I think that would be really useful when traveling, but just being, conscious of that. And I know there's some questions related. No, I don't know if you wanted to get into them now and
Yeah.
flesh through some of these
Yeah, I
issues.
think it makes sense to
Yeah.
talk about now. So we have a couple related questions. One is what about taking a burner phone, right? Is that a good idea? Does that draw extra attention if they pull it up and sort of recognize it as being a burner phone? Do we have any recommendations about that?
I think in the current environment, I recommend that people take precautions, including getting a burner phone. I think they're called pay-as-you-go phones too, and that's what I think you shouldn't be worried about bringing at, attention upon yourself because you've taken precautions. Because let me tell you, being Muslim is going to bring attention to yourself, and I'm sorry to say that, but in the current environment, every Muslim in America is a target, and because I think that's abhorrent, I spend a lot of time trying to help the Muslim community avoid some of the problems that could happen when you're traveling internationally.
And we talked a little bit about deleting apps specifically. I mean, is there recommendations on how to go about doing that? Are there certain apps that you definitely want to delete? And as far as the cloud is concerned, like, can you go on the cloud and delete off the cloud? And what does that look like? I know we're not tech people here, so if we have to pass off some more technical questions, maybe that's what we have to do.
Yeah, we may have to pass some of those off, but yeah, just, the pay-as-you-go phone is kind of the best bet because there's nothing there that your cloud doesn't exist on it. A lot of people will get, special phones for travel, but then they'll download all the apps that they have on their regular home phone, like all their social media apps and like their WhatsApp. So that's kind of defeating the purpose because if you're getting a new phone and just putting that data back on it, that's not helpful. For US citizens, we've had some people report that they haven't been handing over their phones. And if there's nothing else, in their back that they can hold them for, they'll just harass you and hold you for an extended period of time. Any other status, not sharing your device, could, result in you being denied entry into the country.
And they may seize your phone or your laptop and then give you a receipt and
Yeah.
then keep your phone and your laptop until they're done searching on it.
Right.
There's technology to search for certain words, and those words they can find very easily. And I'm sure you can guess at what some of the words they're searching for. If you're coming as a tourist, they're looking for anything related to work or employment. If you're Muslim, they're searching for words related to issues of alleged national security of concern to the U.S. All those they have that technology, and technology is not our friend in this arena.
Yeah, and a lot of times when they're using that software and pinging those words, they're not putting it into context. And then they're shifting that burden onto the arriving individual to prove, and they'll look for any reason to kind of find fraud or misrepresentation. And we've had a lot of reports of people just being held for days at O'Hare while they sort through that. So it's unfortunate and harassing, but it's what's happening.
Yeah. I would also add that, even if you haven't, committed a crime or done something wrong, it's important to think about how your photos and social media content would be perceived. We've seen people flagged for having images of as Ahmed mentioned, of a Palestinian flag with Arabic text over it. And often, even if it's not your content, even if you're part of a WhatsApp group where somebody else sent this image, they can still keep your phone, and you can encounter issues because of it.
And we got one more question about phones that I see coming in. What is the sort of process, or what is their ability not just to take your phone, but then insist that you put in your passwords so that they can access your phone?
So yes, they will ask you to put in your password so that you can access your phone. They also have the technology and software to open the phone without you actually inputting the password. If you have Face ID, it's recommend you turn that off and have a number code. But yeah. Calvin, I think you're muted.
Okay. You can resist giving them passwords. You can resist giving, you can delete all these things. If they want your phone or their computer, they'll just seize it and take and return it at a later time. And then you need to figure out whether they've done something that should be concerning to you, or you should just get a new laptop or a new phone. I don't want to make people paranoid, but I'm a little paranoid. I don't think it's paranoia to be concerned about what the current government may do that violates our civil liberties, and so we should be aware of that.
If your device is confiscated, they should give you a receipt with a contact number. If not, make sure you ask for that. Note the name of the officer, badge number if you can. But they should give you a receipt so you can get your devices back.
And let me just say, all of this is horrific, and it is the reality we're living in. And the best way, from my point of view, to deal with this horrific reality is to become politically active in defending the Muslim community, defending civil liberties in our country, and finding ways of defeating the people who are now in charge of our government and our Congress. We need political change, and activism is the only way to bring about the political change we need.
John, I don't know. Would you like to move to a new topic, or should we do more questions?
I do want to say one thing about the Palestinian world. The Israeli, as a Jewish American, I'm ashamed to have to say this, but it's what everyone knows. The Palestinian world is on the computers of the Israeli government. Every Palestinian in the world is recorded, who their relatives are, what villages they're from, who's in detention camps, who's been in detention camps. I assume, you should always assume that that information is available to the U.S. government. So Palestinians are subject to greater scrutiny, and the information that the Mossad and the Israeli government have is probably shared with the U.S. government, such that whatever records are with the Israeli government are available to the U.S. government. And people should think about that in terms of how they're dealt with upon return to the United States, because that information is available.
No, I'm not sure if there are other questions about electronic devices, but if not, I'll move on to.
And nothing more on electronic devices, so we can come up. I know people have sent in more questions. We will get to them as we're going along.
Okay, all right. In that case, let's turn to green card holders and visa holders. We touched on this a little bit, but can we talk about the mistakes that lawful permanent residents or green card holders make that could lead CBP to think that they've abandoned their status?
Yeah, this is Calvin, I know this is your favorite topic on how people stay out for longer than they should. They don't, get reentry permits prior to coming in.
No, prior to leaving.
I'm sorry, yes, leaving.
Okay. Yeah, Historically, this has been a problem, but not as great a problem as it's now becoming. If you may be out of the country for more than 6 months, um, then you should be getting a reentry permit. And if you don't know whether you will be out for more than 6 months, you should be applying for a reentry permit. And that is the safest way to protect your status if you are out for more than 6 months. Um, you should also be concerned in the current environment if you're only coming in for 1 week and then you're out for 5 months and then are out of the country for another 5 months and come back for 1 week, that they could also decide that you're not you don't have the intent to maintain your permanent residence. So these issues should be discussed with lawyers who have talent in this area before people travel.
Yeah, and I think this is a common issue with the elderly within the community, where they're trying to maintain their lawful permanent residence and also want to go back home, and be with other family, where they will inadvertently abandon their status without realizing they have or be open to more
So
scrutiny.
one thing I suggest, for example, if someone is out of the country and they didn't get a reentry permit, and then they are out for more than 6 months, it's very good if there's documentation available to show that you didn't anticipate being out for more than 6 months, but there was an illness, either your own illness or a family member's illness that required you be out of the country for more than 6 months. That type of evidence is helpful in explaining and demonstrating that you did not intend to abandon your permanent residence. Also, the fact that you continue to pay taxes, that you maintained a residence if you did, that you maintained employment, worked remotely, things of that nature can also help prove that you didn't intend to abandon your permanent residency.
Yeah, and then at the port of entry here, when you're coming in, there's oftentimes lawful permanent residents, green card holders are pressured to sign what's called like an I-407, which you are proactively you're withdrawing, you're canceling your lawful permanent resident status. And sometimes, when you're in the situation, when you're stuck in secondary inspection, you almost feel, or screening, you feel pressured to sign something. You might be coerced. Like, we'll let you out, just sign this document. If it's abandoning your permanent residency, I mean, you shouldn't be signing anything, but make sure you do not sign anything that would do that. And it's called the I-407. Just if you're a lawful permanent resident, ingrain that form into your mind, because that's something you definitely do not want to sign. And we're seeing that CBP is trying more frequently than prior.
Yeah, they say, I'll let you in as a tourist, just sign the 407. But what you should also know is if you refuse to sign, they can't deny you entry or deport you if you're a permanent resident without giving you a right to go before a judge. So many of the judges are much more fair-minded than the CBP officers. Although unfortunately, many of the better judges are being fired by the Trump administration. So that's another source of great concern if you're put in removal proceedings.
So we did get one more phone question, and I don't want it to slide past. What do you guys think about putting your regular phone packed away in your suitcase and you just have a burner phone on your person?
Well, that may not help you if they just look through your suitcase and find your regular phone. So it doesn't, the phone is still there and they know they can search your belongings anytime they want to see what's in your belongings. It offers no protection.
Yeah, so not really helpful.
So we just had a question come in as it relates to the reentry permits. If a reentry permit has been declined, what's your advice in terms of traveling out of the country?
Well, you better see a lawyer first who understands immigration law and review the reason why it was declined. I've never seen one declined. Oftentimes denials happen because somehow the form wasn't properly completed. But in some cases, it may signal that there's a concern that may make a person subject to removal proceedings or denial of entry. And one thing you should also know is there's more than a year backlog in the adjudications of reentry permits. So if you apply for a reentry permit and you're leaving the country while it's pending, take the receipt notice from the government and a copy of the reentry permit application with you, so you can show that to U.S. Customs and Border Protection upon returning to the United States that you have applied for a reentry permit.
Anything else on the questions, Noah, that are relevant?
Have not relevant to this. We have a whole list of questions, and I know some of them are topics that we haven't yet gotten to. So I'll let Shauna sort of move us forward.
Okay, so let's say someone has had a bad experience at the airport. They've been detained, searched or insulted. If you believe that your rights have been violated, what are some options that you have for redress?
Well, there is a procedure known as TRIP that for you to file a complaint, and in some cases that can resolve a problem. So in the future, you don't have that problem. But I would say that it really depends on the type of problem, whether that continues. If you're getting 4 S's on your boarding passes, or you're routinely sent to secondary, and there's a subject that they're always interrogating you about, the TRIP isn't going to make the TRIP complaint is not going to make things worse, in my opinion. It may not resolve your problem, and you won't know till you see whether it gets resolved.
Yeah, so it's definitely worth trying, and you'll see we have a slide up that will take you to that website for the Traveler Redress Inquiry Program. I mean, we've seen a little bit of success from our constituents, but more often than not, there's something else targeting you that the TRIP won't resolve. But we always recommend to try that first to see if it can remove you getting those 4 S's every time, or taken into secondary each time you come back from international travel.
Great. So, and let's talk preparation. So we know travel, especially in this climate, can be anxiety inducing. What are some ways that people can prepare for a trip?
I think talk to an immigration attorney if you have concerns is like step 1. Making sure you have all the requisite documents to support your status, whatever that is, if it's not a U.S. citizen. I don't know, Calvin, what else? Those are the 2 big ones that I can think of.
I think anyone who has had a complicated immigration history should review before departure that history with an immigration lawyer or an organization like CAIR to see what documentation should be brought. So anyone with arrest records should definitely talk with someone to know what impact that might have on your return to the United States. People who may have engaged in some form of fraud or misrepresentation to obtain permanent residence or U.S. citizenship should talk to someone whether what the level of risk is. If you had a fraudulent marriage and you have a green card or you have U.S. citizenship, you need to see what the level of risk is that this was in your history. And the fact that you've been traveling without a problem for years doesn't mean you won't have a problem now.
Yeah, and we've been seeing also, we've getting reports of people being told that those who have global entry, it's valid when they're coming in. They're saying, and that's a discretionary program, just a benefit, but we're seeing a lot of that as well. So having global entry, the U.S. citizen doesn't preempt you from secondaries.
Yeah, but just understand that to get global entry, you have to go through this special screening by the government, and that is something that may expose you to greater problems if you have problems in your background.
So yeah, not everybody should apply for global entry. That's a good point.
So we have a few prep questions here, and preparing to fly questions. So someone asked, how useful is a pre-written airport habeas petition as part of preparations to travel?
It really, well, first of all, let me explain. Habeas petition is under the constitutional protection that the government has to bring the body to the judge, that is your body, or have your lawyer be there to represent you as to whether the government can detain you or continue to detain you. And there are situations where that might be a good idea. For example, I'm aware of cases where people who are been involved in the Palestinian justice struggle and need to travel internationally are worried that they may be, and they're permanent residents, they may be subject to denial of entry because of their political involvement in the justice struggle for Palestine. Those people should consider whether or not what's the level of risk they're facing, and whether they may want to hire a lawyer to prepare a habeas petition to present. The problem with habeas petitions is that you need to get in a court, a federal court with friendly judges or potentially more friendly judges. You need to file the case while you're still in Illinois and before they removed you to another jurisdiction with less friendly judges. So, and there's been some very high profile cases of Palestinians involved in the struggle who've filed habeas petitions real quickly so that they're, even if the government moved them, the case would be decided by a judge in a more friendly jurisdiction. But people who, let me tell you that unfortunately, I can give you a guideline for the Palestinian struggle. If you have been identified by some of the Jewish hate groups as a person who is those hate groups are demanding that the government take action and punishing them for their involvement in the Palestinian struggle, then those people in that situation really need to talk with a lawyer about what the dangers of international travel are, or what the dangers may be of applying for U.S. citizenship while you're a permanent resident, and how to best protect yourself. And a habeas petition could be done that it could serve that purpose. I have prepared such petitions since Trump became president. Luckily, in those cases, they have not been needed, but people wanted the security that we could run to federal court to try to stop them from being transferred to a jurisdiction. And the real issue here is this interpretation of federal law, which I'd never seen used before, which is you are seen as you're a permanent resident and you are someone who is presence in the U.S. can be adverse to U.S. foreign policy as determined by the Secretary of State. And it's really the people I've seen in the Palestine justice struggle who have been facing these challenges are people who've been at the forefront of the Jewish hate groups that are demanding that the Trump administration take action against these people. And they've been identified by the government, and that is and they are people in that situation are at the greatest risk.
I know Shauna wants to talk about TAP a little bit. So one last quick question. We'll come back around to questions afterwards. So if your question hasn't been answered, just give us a second. But I want to talk about this as far as return, because I think it's an interesting question. Does it help to stick sort of in a family unit as you come back through customs, when there might be one person in the family who might get taken? Is that, or into secondary screening? Does CBD have any compunction about pulling one person away from a family, or will they be less likely to do so?
I think that makes no difference to them. And if someone's admissible and one person in the family is being sent to secondary inspection, I don't think they're going to allow the family to hang out with the person being sent to secondary inspection. So what I strongly suggest is that when traveling internationally, you should have some way in which your family or your friends know that if you are not admitted to the United States within 1.5 hours of your arrival, they should be considering what steps should be taken to inquire as to what's happened. And they don't make it easy to find out what's happened to someone who's not been admitted. I have numbers that I use to call the CBP officers, and I can get some information. I sometimes go out to the airport and go to the CBP office and ask to see a supervisor. That sometimes helps. But they make it very challenging to find out. Lately I've been using elected officials, even state representatives and state senators to call the number at the airport. They seem to have some success in getting more information that even I can get if they call and identify themselves as a state senator or a state rep or a city official. They seem to be more willing to share information. Sometimes with family members, if you go to the CBP office at the airport, which is hidden behind the McDonald's at the international terminal, you can get information. Some of the officers are nicer than others.
Yeah, it is really hit or miss. Depends who's there as to what information you're going to get.
They are unfortunately under tremendous pressure from the Trump administration to not exercise discretion favorably. And that's true not just in U.S. Customs and Border Protection, it's true for ICE, it's true for USCIS.
So I'd like,
one of the things I hear them say all the time, I'm just following orders. That's, to me, a frightening thing to hear when people say we're just following orders. It's not me doing this.
Yeah.
so I'd like to take a moment to highlight our Travelers Assistance Project, or TAP, which provides legal support to travelers who may be targeted at the border, especially Muslim, Palestinian, and others impacted from the impacted communities. So if you or somebody you know is traveling and concerned about secondary screening, detention, phone searches, TAP offers resources and support from volunteer attorneys. The website is tapus.org. So fill out the form, shortly before your trip, and if you require immediate assistance for whatever reason, there's a phone number that you can text.
Yeah, it is really important that you only text that phone number. Nobody will live answer that phone number, but if you text it, myself and one of my colleagues gets pinged. It's really important to fill out that form too, so we have all the essential information about you, and we can do what we can to advocate for you in case something goes awry when you enter the country.
Well, so we have a few more questions and we have a few more minutes. So if that's all right, I'll ask them and we can get a few more answers. There is a series of questions here, I think, about whether the location of the place you're traveling to or returning from might have an impact on the likelihood that you'll be brought in for secondary screening. What do people think?
Yeah, it can have a little bit of an impact. It can open you up to questions. As long as you answer truthfully, you should be fine. What's more relevant is your immigration history, right? What's more relevant is your criminal history. I know I did see a question in the Q&A about like, am I open to more scrutiny if I'm coming back from Hajj, like a religious pilgrimage? And I will tell you that this past Hajj season, from the number of people that reported to us they'd be traveling and wanted us to keep an eye out for them versus the ones that actually got detained, there were very few. We did get reported handfuls, but they were detained for other reasons, not because they went to go perform the Hajj pilgrimage.
Um, how about domestic travel? Are these same concerns existing in domestic travel?
People who are getting 4Ss for domestic travel are going to keep getting 4Ss that delay their travel until there's some resolution through the trip system, or for some reason the government decides to take them off the list of people who get the 4Ss. And people who are getting those 4Ss should talk with an immigration lawyer about why they're getting those 4Ss, and see if you can brainstorm what the reasons are, and is there anything to do that would get the person off the list through a trip involvement. There are many Palestinians I know who are getting 4Ss, and frequently it's related to who the relatives are on the West Bank or in Gaza, and somehow because of information that the U.S. government has gotten, they are seen as a potential threat.
Does it matter why you're flying? I know we talked about Hajj there, Hina, for a moment, but if it's for business, if it's for tourism, is it for religious reasons like Hajj, if it's for a humanitarian trip, does that have any effect on whether or not you're going to go into secondary screening?
Well, frequently the government doesn't know why you're traveling. They just know the countries you went to. And if you've gone to Syria, you're likely to be subject to secondary inspection. If you've gone to Yemen, you're going to be subject to secondary inspection. If you have close family members who are on some list that the Israeli government has shared with the U.S. government, you're going to be sent to secondary inspection. Those are all issues of concern. And I'm not sure that the reason you're traveling is as important. I see a question which I want to answer because it's important. The 10,000 limit that isn't on taking cash in or out of the country applies to family units in the interpretation of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So don't think because you give your child 3,000 and your wife 3,000 and the grandmother 3,000, and then you have 5,000 that you're not going to have the money seized. And it can be seized leaving the country, and it can be seized entering the country. Somehow people think that when they're leaving, if they're carrying the money, the government doesn't know, but when your luggage goes through the screening in TSA screening, they can see the money, and they then advise the government, the agents necessary from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and they seize the money. And then it's your burden to prove how you earned it, and otherwise they keep it.
For those who have been through secondary screening, but maybe that was a long time ago, is there increased scrutiny or increased likelihood that they'll go back into secondary screening, even if they've flown previously without having to go back through it? There's been a period of time in which they haven't had secondary screening.
In the current environment, I would think the chances of being sent to secondary again is pretty high. But it doesn't mean everyone who's ever been in secondary is going to be sent to secondary every time.
Let's see.
I see a question on ports of entry where CBP has inspectors screening people before they are allowed
Yeah.
aboard, whether they're more difficult. Same as questions asked about Abu Dhabi. There are various ports of entry in the world, Ireland, Abu Dhabi, most, but not all airports in Canada. I have not seen them to be particularly um, more challenging than airports in the US. But the risk is that you're out of the country, and so if they deny you boarding privileges and entry privileges, it may make it more challenging to pursue your rights.
Yeah, we've been recommending to not use those ports and come into, into the US and enter. Just so you're here. And there's more that can be done.
We have a bunch of questions, and this is a bit of an unanswerable maybe, but we have a bunch of questions. I think people are rightfully nervous. I mean, what really does seem to be the likelihood that someone gets stopped? How many people coming off the plane are getting stopped? Do we know the answer to this question?
Well, the people who you can ask that question to, in some cases, might be Turkish airlines, the Royal Jordanian, or you could get some sense of that by talking to employees of Royal Jordanian and Turkish Airways. Those are two that the flight from Amman that comes to Chicago and the flight from Istanbul that comes to Chicago. They know what is happening because they have that type of information available to them. But those are the people. Those airlines have a lot of information and helpful information, and may be willing to share them.
So we have a few more phone questions that have come back around. So if you come through secondary or you come into secondary without a phone at all, is that at all suspicious? Do you expect something to happen based on that?
I think if you say you don't have a phone and you really don't have a phone, I don't think the fact that you're taking that precaution means you're going to necessarily be having a more challenging time. I think you should take every precaution that you feel is necessary to protect your privacy, protect your family's privacy, and protect your friends' privacy. And I wouldn't worry about retaliation for taking legal steps to protect your privacy.
We have time for one last question here, and this is a bit of a predictive question, a little bit, but someone wants to know. I mean, do they wait to travel until there's a new president? Is it maybe just best to hold off on travel? Will there be a change? Can we predict something like that?
If only, right? Like if we could predict future policy change.
I think it really depends on what risk factors you have in your background and evaluating those risks and whether it's worth it to travel. And that's number one. Number two, you want to hope for change without working for it. That's not going to work. So become politically active. Come to the CAIR banquet. I'm going to be there, and you can all talk to me at the CAIR banquet on October
5th. Yeah.
The day after my birthday, so you can say happy birthday to me. What I want to encourage you to do is become activists. My good friend is Abdel Nasser Rashid, and Abdel Nasser Rashid is the first Palestinian in the Illinois legislature. And let me tell you, the conversation in Springfield has changed on issues of Palestinian justice and Israel since Abdel Nasser's been there. It's so important that we have Muslims in our government working. Become politically active. Elect Muslims to political office and elect non-Muslims who are friendly to the Muslim community and defending the Muslim community. It's super important to be activists. Everyone should realize the importance. If we don't like what Trump is doing to our society, then you must be involved politically and in the change and teach your children and grandchildren to become activists. And don't worry about the consequences of being an activist, because our only protection for the future is for all of us to become activists in the struggle for justice and freedom. And that's
Well, Calvin, you got a very early birthday wish. Someone wished you a very early birthday.
well, I often tell people I was born in 1948, so I'm as old as the Nakba. And I hope Allah gives me lots of health so I can continue in the struggle into my 80s.
Inshallah. I mean, yeah, we hope for that too, Kalman. This has been really great. I want to make sure that those on the webinar know that you have a resource in CAIR-Chicago. You know, you've met our two new staff attorneys, Shauna Nissan and Noah Halpern. You've had a brief introduction to myself as a legal director, and Kalman Resnick, who is on our legal advisory board. So we are here to help advise. We are here to help support you. We have a lot of resources. Shauna, if you want to talk about our website a little bit and what's on there, so people have some next steps they can take and look at, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. You know, our website has plenty of, know your rights and training manuals. We also have, you're able to submit an intake. So I know some people had some more specific questions about their particular case. You're welcome to navigate to the, to the Get Help drop-down menu and submit an intake to, talk to either myself or Noah. But I think, the takeaway is international travel has become increasingly risky for people in our communities. And, if you're a non-citizen considering travel, I think absolutely you should speak to an immigration attorney first. And, just assume that everything will be scrutinized, your record, your luggage, your phone. And so it's, it's better to be over-prepared than caught off guard.
And with that, we will go ahead and end today's webinar. Thank you all for attending. Thank you to all of us who were on this panel and able to give us information. I hope people found this helpful. You may get some a form to feedback and give us some feedback on how this Know Your Rights session was, and if it was helpful and what more you'd like us to get online about. So thank you all, and I have a good evening. And we look forward to continuing to support and protect your rights. And I echo what Kalman said previously: is become an activist, right? That's how we kind of fight back. So, good night.